In research, there are multiple ways to study human phenomena. The three main ways are self-reports, direct observations, and biomarkers. We will briefly discuss a few of the benefits and cons of each of these different methods. The first one is probably the most common, especially among faculty in the School of Family Life. Self-report survey research is any measurement procedure that involves the direct questioning of respondents, such as questionnaires and interviews. We'll watch this funny example during class. Let's skip over it. Questionnaire surveys are the most common form of research in the social sciences because they are practical and relatively low cost. You can give surveys like this in a variety of ways. Most common today is the online method, and that is what you will be using for your empirical paper. Though you could do mail surveys or electronic daily diaries is also really common. Electronic daily diaries are you have someone fill out the same questionnaire every single day, or you send them a short questionnaire multiple times a day, or whatever it may be. Questionnaires are awesome because you can gather large amounts of data in a relatively small time period. For example, one survey project I worked on a few years ago got 6,000 respondents in a few months, and I'm currently doing a project that has collected almost 2,000 respondents in the last month. It's really fast, it's really nice. A lot of the data comes in the same format, so you don't have a lot of cleaning to do. Afterwards, like people are just answering questions, you get the numbers, and you're done. But there are also some significant disadvantages. Social desirability bias is when your participants answer what they think they should answer instead of what their honest answer would be. For example, when you ask adults about their excessive drinking use, you may not get honest answers because people may not want to answer something that is socially unacceptable, such as, I am a drunk and I get drunk every single night, or I'm binge drinking multiple times a month, whatever it may be. Retrospective recall is when you ask someone about the past and they don't remember. For example, what did you eat for breakfast 1 week ago? Or how about a harder one? How many times did your parents talk to you about religion during your youth? I would probably respond multiple times a week, which is an average based on what I remember, but that may not be totally accurate for a specific week or time of my life. For example, there may be a time during my teenage years where my parents were talking to me all the time, or we could have gone a long time where they weren't talking to me except going to church. But I remember it, and so I answer about it, and that may be different from the truth and the reality. Fatigue is when your survey is too long and the participant stops paying attention to your questions and answering them honestly because they get distracted or tired. Poorly worded questions is an especially challenging one, especially for those of us who have been writing survey questions for a long time. We forget about the jargon, even jargon is a jargon word, that we are using and think that everyone understands concepts in the same way that we do. We may say social desirability bias or even parental warmth. People may not understand what parental warmth is. They're like, well, when you hug, it makes your child warmer, like a blanket. No, we're talking about parental warmth being like responsive to your child's needs. Even something like that may be difficult on a poorly worded question, or it may just be confusing with a lot of double negatives or whatever. We all need to be especially careful about poorly worded questions. Throughout the course, we are going to talk about a lot of different ways you can strengthen your surveys, so stay tuned. I'm going to click through a bunch of examples right now that we talk about in class, so I beg for your patience. Sorry about this. Okay, as common as questionnaires are, there are actually a lot of problems with them. First, because survey research is really easy to do online, there is no contact between the researcher and the participant. This is a great resource for researchers who are trying to study different populations than the people who live close to them, like BYU researchers wanting to study people other than Latter-day Saints. We use online surveys all the time because we cannot just invite community members to come into our research centers, because then we would get entirely Latter-day Saint samples and we wouldn't be able to publish those in academic journals. But it also means that your participants cannot ask clarification questions during the survey if they think a question is ambiguous. Some of this can be solved by in-person contact such as going to a home and giving them the survey and being able to answer questions, but your participants may not always ask the questions that they have. Another problem is that it is extremely difficult to get options that cover all the possible options, meaning you're not exhaustive, and each participant can only select one answer. For example, how are you going to address race? Are you going to have just the common ones like white, black, Hispanic, Asian? What about Hispanics who identify or are also white racially but Hispanic ethnically? That would be 2. If that is the case, what does someone from the Middle East put if you only put white, black, Hispanic, Asian? What if you want to include someone from the Middle East? What about biracial people? For example, if your dad is black and your mom is Asian. This can get pretty complicated very fast. Double-barreled means that one answer contains 2 statements, but may not be both true for the participant. I will give some better examples of this during class. Or you may have another example is you may have leading questions where the participant thinks you are trying to get them to answer a certain question, so they don't answer honestly. And I don't mean to get political here, but whatever you may think of President Trump, this opinion poll to me is leading. It says, how would you rate President Trump's job performance so far? Great, good, okay, other. He's not allowing for lower options than okay. And so I would have to say that this opinion poll is a little biased, but I'm not trying to get political or anything about President Trump. All right, so those were questionnaires. Here are observational studies. In general, there are 2 ways to do observational studies. One is where the researcher controls the environment, and the second where the researcher goes into the environment to study natural phenomena. Controlled observations are typically conducted in a laboratory or possibly in a home environment. Procedures are standardized, meaning that the researcher gives the same questions to everyone, or the researchers are trained to perform some task. In fact, the quality of the data gathered depends on how consistent the researcher is at performing the task or asking the questions. For example, if we were going to do an interview, you would need to make sure that the interviewer was asking the same questions every time. If the interviewer asked different questions, you wouldn't have the same data on every participant, so you wouldn't be able to analyze each participant the same, if that makes sense. All observational research involves coding of behaviors on scales or into categories. Coding in this context means categorizing behaviors, and we'll do an activity in class where you get to practice coding. And I'm going to skip through it right now. So don't look. And here we are. Observational studies get rid of many of the biases inherent in questionnaire research. It gets rid of self-report biases because they are not actually answering questions. It is more objective since you are getting rid of those biases, and many scientists trust what they can see or observe, which is perfect in an observation. Additionally, because you are observing their behavior, you might be able to pick up on something that the participants are unaware of. For example, if you are trained in facial expressions and lying, you may be able to spot someone lying, whereas the average person wouldn't be able to tell that their partner was lying. So you as a researcher may be trained to detect things that an average person would not be looking for or is not trained to detect. Controlled observations come with their own problems. For example, the environment is not the same. Even if you are in the participant's home and observing an interaction between a mother and child, that interaction is likely not natural or the same as if you weren't there. This is called the Hawthorne effect, where people behave differently simply because they are being observed. Also, as Stephanie mentioned, tapes can be very tedious to code and transcribe. They require a lot of time, a lot of effort, and many researchers do not have that time, and unfortunately or fortunately, they use a lot of undergraduates volunteering, trying to get research experience to work through this process. Okay, natural observations are different because they're conducted in a natural setting. There is no standardization because you as a researcher are not meant to be there, or you're not controlling the experiment. Some examples of this may be setting up a security camera, with consent of course, in someone's house and observing them for a week, looking at all their different interactions with each other, looking at routines, rituals, whatever it may be. Or you could also go to a playground and observe the kids playing during recess and mark how many times they kicked a ball, how many times they punched each other, or how many times someone was walking alone. You could also ask someone to wear a device that records everything they say for 24 hours. This is really common in media research to see if media having the TV on decreases the number of words that parents say to their children. It has a lot of the pros and cons of controlled observations, except you have added ecological validity, which we'll talk about when we talk about reliability and validity later on. You read about it on Monday, though. You read about validity, at least. Participant observation is another form of observation where the researcher poses as a member of the group. The easiest example of this is a researcher going to live with an indigenous tribe to help understand the culture. Another example may be that you develop a family life education program to help parents know how to discipline their child. Then you enroll yourself in one of the sessions under the same or a different name and see how it goes. You could either be explicit by using your name about your role as the researcher, or be undercover so the participants act more naturally just thinking you are a participant like them. Think more about the advantages and disadvantages of this approach, and we'll discuss it in class. Physiological markers are probably one of the coolest uses of technology available for social science researchers. When we were discussing anxiety on Monday, many of you operationalized anxiety using physiological markers such as heart rate and hormones. Physiological markers are becoming very common in graduate programs today. When I went to do interviews, as an aside, a lot of people wanted to know whether I had training in various physiological markers, so that because that's kind of the hot topic cutting edge research right now. Everybody wants to do this physio stuff. You could use this kind of measure if you wanted to study couple conflict. You could bring a husband and a wife into a lab and have them talk about a topic that is stressful to them while connecting them to some physiological machines. Then you'd be able to look at their emotional flooding during the conversations to assess whether partners are able to keep their cool during conflict discussions. For example, if you wanted to study fight or flight response, you would need to collect heart rate, blood pressure, sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline, and sweating. And some research findings from this are that men actually flood more than women. That would be your conclusion. Some other examples that are biologically based are married couples show attunement in stress hormones from day to day, which predicts the longevity of the marriage. I'll let you read them. Small tests help diagnose autism more objectively. Loneliness may initiate cognitive and physical degeneration among the elderly. There are some really cool things that you can answer, really cool questions you can answer. So why wouldn't you always use them? There are a lot of challenges to physio research. The machines are extremely expensive and can be very complicated. Your machine may break down and you may lose months of research time trying to fix it, or you have to pay more money to fix it fast. Or if you're at a research institution like BYU that uses a lot of undergraduates, there's high turnover, so people are always training. So you as a researcher are always training new people to use the machines, which is a lot of time. Because of this, few professors in the School of Family Life are currently doing physio research. Though in psychology, I do know some professors who use eye trackers and EEGs, and we have an MRI machine over by the Life Sciences building that has an fMRI as well. So we do have capabilities, but they're expensive, and most of the time the School of Family Life is using survey research, at least in my experience. But that was a basic summary of methods and measurement. I look forward to seeing you in class.